to say forced placebo effect is a very 4D chess psychoanalysis.
It's definitely a next level desperation move.
Yeah.
This will work. I promise myself this will work.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Chemist Confessions podcast. I'm Victoria.
I'm Gloria.
And this is a human conversation on all the skincare science we talk about on the daily. And today we're finally doing it. We are entering the acne realm, and we are starting off with an adjacent ingredient that is really getting a lot of buzz right now, and that is hypochlorous acid.
Yeah, I'm actually pretty excited for today's episode. I think this has been a trendy ingredient that's really been around for the past, I guess at this point, 3-4 years now. And I feel like it's only gotten bigger as more products come out in this category. It's got a lot of that. I almost want to say that it has a sciencey story piled with a lot of anecdotal, like, this thing saved my life, saved my acne. It's got a lot of great testimonial and therefore a lot of intrigue that kind of keeps snowballing for.
Yes.
But meanwhile, there's also a lot of misinformation and a lot of confusion around what it's supposed to do for you, really.
Yeah, and really, it does feel like one of those miracle ingredients with all of the marketing and social buzz. So with that, we are going to get into the ingredient. And I will tell you right out of the gate, thank God there's stuff to talk about. This is not going to be one of those ingredients where we're like, oh no, like it's going to be a 15-minute video. So we got a lot to unpack. And how we're going to break it down is in the first section, we are actually going to simply talk about what it is, essentially how it ended up in skincare, but really its stability, which is a big chunk. The second section will be about its actual efficacy for skin outside of wound healing, which is not in the skincare realm. And then finally, we'll summarize all of it in tips on how to use, how to buy, because this is definitely one of those quirky ingredients.
So let's dive right into it. One of the top things, if you've ever looked into it, the first claim you'll hear is hypochlorous acid is a natural component of skin. Your skin produces it itself. That part is true. It's basically a natural response. Your skin, think of it as your skin's little defensive suicide bombers that gets released and just pummels bacteria. Obviously, you hear about how it's not very stable, which is honestly kind of something we'll explore a little later on, which is how unstable it is. But this kind of makes sense from a biological standpoint. It kind of, it's produced, do its job very quickly, very efficiently, degrades before it causes, further damage to your skin rather than microbes, and just kind of fizzles out.
Yeah. So in terms of mechanism and an actual descriptor, hypochlorous acid is a weak acid. It is a oxidant. It is a weak acid and oxidizer. And that's what Gloria means by being a suicide bomber, because essentially, as a response towards injury or infection, it's going to bind to essentially lipid layers of any pathogens and essentially disrupt that cellular integrity. And if that sounds like something you might have seen in a cartoon, yes, we've actually sketched this out way back in the day when we were actually explaining what free radicals do in skin. And that's essentially why is to cause damage. So that sounds like a little scary, right? Because essentially that's pro-aging, but we'll get into that a little bit in detail. In terms of how it ended up in skincare, let's talk about its origin story. So it basically started out as a disinfectant. And the benefit of this as a disinfectant is that it's effective against microbes. It's very cost effective. And it's actually quite gentle because the concentration used is very low. The problem with this is that most medical offices and hospitals, they made these batches fresh because it's inherently unstable. One really fascinating factoid that has nothing to do with skincare, but I thought would be fun to share, is that they actually mention how it's used as a disinfectant. At concentrations of 200 ppm, hypochlorous acid is effective in decontaminating inert surfaces in a 1-minute contact time, which I think is kind of important. People forget, like, oh, spritz, immediately gone. Time matters. They actually talk about if you dilute that tenfold to only using 20 ppm, it will take 10 minutes of contact time to actually disinfect the surface. So kind of a fun little data point for you there in terms of how it works.
Yeah, and that's also something you can keep in mind too in terms of its mechanism of action. What does that mean for your routine? All these are things to keep in mind. Another reason why hypochlorous acid is so popular in a medical setting is that it is a very powerful antibacterial agent, but it's actually demonstrated efficacy against viruses as well. In fact, in the fact that Victoria just referenced, at the concentration of 200 ppm, it's effective at decontaminating surfaces carrying norovirus. And when I heard that line of someone with a toddler at home right now, I'm like, case shut. I'm done with this episode. I'm ordering a case for my toddler who may or may not just have random bursts of loose number 2. So there you go.
Yeah. So, I mean, all in all, it makes sense. And it's definitely interesting in the realm of disinfectants. However, we should talk about why it needs to be made fresh. So we are going to actually start getting into some of the stability data, which the reason why we're putting this on your radar is because you'll most likely hear about this on social. There's a lot of concerns about actual efficacy of the products you buy on shelf. So let's get into that. First, starting with, yes, as we mentioned, hypochlorous acid, not that stable. In fact, it seems like most things make it very angry and want to die a very quick death. As far as temperature goes, the general recommendation is to use at room temp.
Fun fact, Victoria and I, when we get ingredient samples and try on new active ingredients, those are the ones that always give us a huge red flag, is the ones with a temperature requirement, especially the ones that's like, keep under 25 C, but really, we recommend refrigerating. And we're like,
yes. Yes, the ones that recommend refrigeration and come on ice for Gloria and I is usually not going to get very high priority. It's so true. The second thing is pH. I think I should also mention the good thing is a lot of work is done looking at stability. So this is it feels good to us that there is this acknowledgement, understanding, and it's very clear that the industry in terms of creating products really focuses on this aspect. And as we share all of the data, you'll see why. So in terms of pH, the general target is going to be around 4 to 6.5. The reason being is reactions will occur once across the different pHs. And when you start getting too acidic or too alkaline, you're actually going to start losing some of that hypochlorous acid, and you're actually going to be creating other compounds that are potentially harmful. So pH stability is quite important. And there is a stat that is more just a data point to kind of give you some more context. But one of the studies had mentioned that at a pH of 7.4, they found that only 56% of the chlorine species in solution was hypochlorous acid. So if that were to give you an idea of, why fine-tuning pH is important, just in terms of getting enough hypochlorous acid to remain effective, but also not creating not so good stuff.
I will say the pH stat gave me some level of comfort because lightly acidic is very much in line with general skincare pH. And 3 to 6.5-ish is actually it's a fairly wide gap. So I was like, okay, not too bad.
Yeah.
Then we get into some other interesting factoids. The one that kind of, it makes a lot of sense, but it's kind of interesting to see just how much it affects it, is the quality and type of water. Like Victoria mentioned, in hospitals, a lot of times you make these batches fresh. And usually you will hope in hospitals you will make it from distilled, very pure water. And that does matter. You should not do this with tap water. The study we found really demonstrated the degree of difference the quality of water can make. We're going to go ahead and put the chart on the screen. You'll see that they created hypochlorous acid in these different conditions. On the chart, the blacked out lines are ones that's created with in a closed off, shielded environment. The non-filled in points are for open, like just you make the water, it's exposed to air, and they repeated the study with both pure water and just straight tap water. And you can see that for obviously when it's open and exposed to oxygen, other environment, it degrades very quickly on the order of days, from 0 to 10 days. But even when it's closed off, if you use tap water, so there might be some trace minerals, the degradation is still very, very rapid, even if you start out with in a shielded condition.
Yeah. So, and The other thing to point out and reiterate is that not only does this show that quality of water, type of water matters, oxygen matters. So
Mm-hmm.
the takeaway here is also, and we'll review later, is that you don't want to be opening your bottles of hypochlorous acid solutions. It's clearly very impactful on the longevity. So one thing to point out there. Yeah.
I also want to say that at this point in the paper, I'm still like, this doesn't seem as unstable as I thought. pH 3 to 6.5, very reasonable. If you looked at the one that's produced with pure water and shielded, by day 10, it seems like a solid 95% is still around. Not the longest timeline, but not super fragile compared to some stuff we've seen before either. And when we talk about things like retinoids and vitamin C, things like that have even shorter timelines. Cool. Then we move into UV sensitivity.
Yeah, so they basically redid this experiment, except they basically placed these basically clear solution bottles either in direct UV or just shielded, which is out of UV. This chart is interesting in the sense that you'll see that the black square line looks stable all the way across, and that's going to be your shielded solution that's using pure water. All right, so great. As long as you don't have it in UV, looks solid. Then you go to the x-axis and you realize, that changed dramatically. No longer are we talking about 8 days. We're actually talking about 8 hours. And that should tell you how tragic it is in terms of hypochlorous acid against UV.
I don't think you can get any products on the market that advertise hypochlorous acid in a clear bottle, thankfully. But just note that just because a container looks opaque doesn't necessarily mean that it's been vetted to defend against UV. So that's something that if you're interested in this category, definitely double check with the brand or look for lingo on UV protection.
The other aspect that they wanted to test to see if it gets along well with other molecules. And we'll put another table up for you to look at. And you can see they're testing it within probably the longest being 7 days, but most of this are falling within the hours range. And
I love the roll of 10 minutes.
Yes. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you guys is not so much that it's hard to say that hypochlorous acid is incompatible with everything, because clearly this is not like a long list. But the general sense is I'd like to point your attention to ascorbic acid, where at a page of 6, you can see hypochlorous acid basically dies at 10 minutes. It's not great. A general guideline for formulating with hypochlorous acid is that it should be incredibly simplistic and it should be the only ingredient in formula because it is just that sensitive. So point out there.
Yeah, so just to point out for everyone looking at this on YouTube, you might think this is a random list of compounds to choose from. In the study, they were looking at specifically because these are components found in the medium from which cells grow on. So it's more like validating methods of, let's say if you want to study hypochlorous acid effect in vitro, how does it impact, the nutritious food that these cells grow on? So it's important for researchers to understand that. Not all of these will be found in skincare. It just kind of to demonstrate a blanket how sensitive it can be and how different components affect it. And Victoria's absolutely right. Hypochlorous acid should be in very simplistic formulas. You might see other things like sodium chloride or other salts to kind of balance that. But generally speaking, simple.
Yeah, shouldn't be more than 5 ingredients, to be honest. The other thing is it is reactive with metal ions, which is fascinating in terms of product development. And for anyone that wants some insider knowledge, when you think of sprays and you think of these spray pumps, a lot of them will utilize a metal spring to have that press down applicator. That means that those applicators have to be mindful of that and cannot essentially use any sort of metal spring, and usually replaced with a plastic spring. So just kind of all the quirks that needs to be taken into consideration when working with this ingredient.
The last thing we kind of want to mention is in the same stability study, bless your soul, this study is, I love it when one paper answers half of our questions.
Yeah.
They also validated all the stability with efficacy. So the most direct way of measuring hypochlorous acid efficacy is just look at how well it can kill off bacteria.
So in terms of the study, what they did was they basically simply incubated hypochlorous acid with pond water at various concentrations to see how much essentially microbes they could kill off. they used what they call active HOCl. So it's essentially formulated with all the right, specs. And then they basically did a version where they call it inactive hypochlorous acid. And this is simply hypochlorous acid incubated at 37 degrees Celsius for 24 hours. And when I read that stat, I was very concerned. I was like, that's all it took is a really hot day for 24 hours.
Definitely not something you leave in your car.
Yes, exactly. So with that, you can see there's a very clear distinction in efficacy. Also want to point out that the concentrations of inactive hypochlorous acid, it varies differently than the active component. All to say that it needs to be active for it to work. Like, it sounds very simple and obvious, but it's a great way to remind you that stability is important.
Yeah, and this is not, I think in skincare, once in a while you'll run into an ingredient where even if it's not fully in its pure form, it will still do something. So in episodes like ascorbic acid, we mentioned that it's something that semi-degraded ascorbic acid to a certain degree, well, whatever surviving will still offer efficacy. But this is not one of those cases, especially for its antimicrobial thing. Once it dies, it's dead.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully that summarizes the stability scenario of hypochlorous acid. The idea here was that you got a sense of what it is. Basically, its general origin story, and also the challenges that are needed to overcome in order to actually create a shelf-stable product. We're going to take a quick break, and then after that, we are going to talk about what exactly does it do for skin that doesn't involve a wound. But with a break.
Are you in need of a ceramide fix? Check out our cult favorite slugging companion, Bon Voyage. This represents our chemist's blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of dollar bills that just went into this one. Well, ultimately, we want to create the salve with a whole 1% of ceramides. It's a tiny but mighty tube that can be used for all your pesky dry patches, face, lips, elbow, wherever you need. So check out Bon Voyage. Please use the code CCPodcast2025 for 15% off your first order. It's time for us to dive into the topical data of hypochlorous acid.
My eyes are like burning, Gloria, just from trying to dissect it all.
I know. I think there's a couple of different types of difficult ingredients for us to talk about. The ones with no data at all, or we have to extract from really far removed in vitro data and try to cross-compare in tubo antioxidant data. Those are difficult to put together. The ones with too many to choose from, and we have to make a conscious decision on picking and choosing what we share. And then ones like this, where there's a lot of hype, and the hype is in multiple different directions, and you're trying to unravel which thread has the actual data, and you find things that's like some pharma, some early stage, and TBD, not to be found. This is one of those cases where it's not one of those hype ingredients that have absolutely nothing, but in terms of untangling the mess and kind of extrapolating what's real, what it's actually good for, it's really difficult.
Yeah, and one very granular gripe I have is I actually found a lot of review papers in this realm to be very problematic because we look at all of the reference papers they use, and when they compile all these studies, we go into each one, and a lot of them are missing. A lot of them, I found quite a discrepancy in what's used, and it probably is partially because it's a very messy realm. Because it's got oranges in pharma, but then what's actually done in clinical is going to be more brand-led, product-led, because formulation and actual processing to create hypochlorous acid matters. And so it's a very messy bridge, and you'll see as we go through the clinicals, some of the testing is not ideal. So with that, I just want to say we are going to look at hypochlorous acid in 3 aspects. We are going to look at it in terms of, very briefly, on scar care. The second thing being as a soother, and the third being as an antimicrobial. So in terms of scar care, we found a paper that is done by a company that creates its own products of hypochlorous acid, and that's called, I just realized I don't know how to say this word, micreocin. I don't know. I just realized I've never had to say this word out loud. Okay. For what it's worth, this brand has actually done quite a bit of testing on their hypochlorous acid solutions, all the way from the in vitro stage, in particularly for treating diabetic foot ulcer, just wound healing, essentially. This is not even a paper. This is more of a poster that is shared of their clinical.
Which I will say, that's like one of the most difficult things with studies like this. It's like, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with studies and data that's more product or brand led. Where in the industry, that sometimes like that's just what we're working with. You can't always just be banking on academia and doing everything. And in this category, I actually think it's great because at the end of the day, you have to look at the formulation as a whole to validate for what they're claiming. So great. But a lot of times these companies aren't incentivized to publish their papers. And we end up with a really fugly poster that we're just supposed to dissect from.
It's so true. But I have to give them credit because they have published papers previously to the clinical study. It's just not published clinical results. So thank God for that. But yes, it is pulling from a poster. But let's talk about the clinical. All right. So they did an 8-week clinical on their essentially hypochlorous acid scar gel. And they compared it to a 100% silicone gel. They tested it on 44 subjects. And what's interesting is they actually pulled subjects with scars of different ages. And what we mean by that is you could have young scars from 3 to 6 months all the way to 9 to 12 months. And I think that is kind of interesting. So with that, they had an expert grader look at the morphology and essentially the overall healing of the scar. And they did some grading, and we'll put those results on the screen for you to see. Now, remember, this is a poster. So in terms of conclusions, analytics, not really there. The reason why I have to mention this because one of the inherent things that you'll see as we go through is they're all missing error bars. There's no real general sense of significant difference. You're really just like making assumption off of these visual graphs you see. So statistically significant, this term is really lacking in this study.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, I mean, it's meant to be a quick snapshot, right? But at the same time, you're just like, it's a concept and we don't have details of it. And then obviously for a poster, I can't even really fault them because by nature, you only have so much real estate. So you have to pick and choose what you share. And of course, you're going to share like some of the top line results and overviews. But all in all, it's just like what it is. It's like a pretty simple snapshot.
We will also share some before and after pictures. Know that her scar is about in the 6 to 9 month old range. And yeah, you get a sense of general improvement. And that's really it. That's like, it's really hard to have a takeaway here because so little data is shared. You have a comparison, but you don't get a sense of, how varied these results are. Overall, I think the takeaway here for scars is it could be helpful, but more data needed in general. The only final point I want to make here is that the lab actually did note that subject global satisfaction was actually similar between treatment groups. And I know this feels like I'm trying to like read between the lines, and I kind of am, but the general sense is it could be better, but even compared to a scar cream, it's, in terms of satisfaction, the subjects that used it, they still felt it's good between the two.
I like the very look of it's like okay.
Might be difficult to, it's not like it seems like there's not a definitive winner. So that is a single piece of data for scar. And that's kind of the state of scar care for hypochlorous acid. There's a lot of mention of its benefits for scar care. But in terms of data, unless we're starting to really venture into, like I mentioned, diabetic foot care or real wound healing, there's nothing, it still feels like a lot needs to be understood. So we're going to move right along to soothing, and in particular, itch. And why am I looking at itch? Because that's the only data I could really find that's very clear for soothing.
I think a lot of times, like these popular products with hypochlorous acid is linked with rosacea care. And it's just hard for us to find anything on other aspects of irritation, anti-inflammation. So soothing itchiness is where we land.
Yeah. And so with that, I have another poster for you, Gloria.
I love posters. You guys didn't think today it's going to be the poster symposium episode.
But I found a poster that looks at hypochlorous acid on eczema patients, which is why I think it's worthy of sharing. It's a simple, very short 3-day study that tested on 30 subjects, 20 with the treated hypochlorous acid side and 10 with untreated. I'm going to put a couple pieces of data on the screen. And the reason why I'm sharing with you the baseline scoring is because what they did was they had experts put their degree of itch on a scale. And my concern here is their itch score is in terms of baseline to start is 1.5 for treated and the untreated side being 1.7. And I just generally feel like as a body of subjects, that itch grade is not as strong as I thought it would be for the mode. So it feels more on like the mild eczema side, which is what I wanted to preface with. The second piece of data that you'll see below is essentially a graph that's showing the degree of improvement for the hypochlorous acid versus the untreated side. The IGA score is actually the expert grading score that's given. The PGA score is actually the score that's given based on the subject's responses. So that's their own self-perceived scoring. What I find fascinating is that the untreated side, you can see that how they rate their severity is decently there. However, the hypochlorous acid, you can see that overall it was perceived to be helpful with their itching in just 3 days.
I will say for audio listeners, it's definitely one of those charts that they don't gotta make 3D, but they somehow made 3D for the poster. So it actually took me a minute to be like, why is one just behind the other? What is the point? But yes, generally speaking, it feels like the hypochlorous acid is definitely helpful, especially compared to untreated. In fact, the IgA seems pretty significant that, untreated side was just neutral with not a lot of change, but the IgA feels like a market improvement thereafter.
Yeah, and I got a comment for audio listeners if you're wondering why it's so comical. They're 3D cones. It's like, I agree. It's like, I don't know why this is on XYZ axis. Like, what's the Z axis? I don't know. It's very confusing. I agree.
And it's a very deliberate choice, right? It's not by any means anyone's default setting. So I'm like, okay.
I will also put up a before and after, and this is actually another expert graded visual score of, I don't know if it is itching and general scratching. The reason why I want to share it is because you can see between day 2 and day 3, I have a really hard time seeing that improvement.
I'm making a face because I'm squinting, and I think to me, it's like, those games where you pick the difference between picture A and picture B. I feel like I'm playing that. And I will say, to be fair to us, is the picture that they share is not exactly the highest quality photo possible. So it could be that the researchers got a much, much better, more high-def version of this. But looking at this, the conclusion they drew was that it decreased by day 2. The change in VAS score was decreased by 60%. And by day 3, it was a whopping 84.5%, which from numerical perspective, it feels almost like healed,
yes.
done. Yes. But the visual change is it's negligible. I think to me, it almost feels like my screen needs to be calibrated. So not saying that it wasn't an improvement, but it just it feels almost too precise.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're wondering what the VAS score is, I also am not familiar with this metric. Essentially, they describe it as a millimeter lengthwise measurement. Then they describe it as from the left side of a line that indicates level of itching. If you're wondering what a VAS score is, they describe it as a millimeter measurement from the left side of a line that indicates level of itching. So it sounds like they're probably measuring an area. And they say 0 millimeters is no itching, but 154 millimeters is most itching, which sounds small, to be honest, in terms of eczema itch areas.
Yeah, and also, what if people resist real, like, I feel like there's a psychological component. Some people are more prone to itching than others, so I don't really know, but that's a measurement used, and so there you go. It could help reduce itchiness. But wait, there's more.
Yeah. So there's another study, and I'll let you guys decide how you feel about quality of study, but this is a open label, non-placebo controlled study of 17 subjects. They are between the ages of 18 to 65 years old, and they are considered to have mild to moderate eczema. And they generally rate this as 5 to 25% of their body has eczema. In terms of treatment, this lab is actually going to be testing another hypochlorous acid hydrogel, where they're going to be applying it 3 times a day for at least 3 hours apart for 2 weeks.
Yeah, and something I want to point out about this formula is that most of you watching this episode is probably only familiar with this ingredient in spray form. The formula, as we mentioned in the first part about stability, should be simplistic, but this kind of shows that there's some inert stuff that can be added to the formula to change the aspect. So this one is still a pretty simple short ingredient list that we'll go ahead and put up on the screen, but clearly they made this type of silicone gel work for hypochlorous acid. There's a lot of different salts in it, I'm guessing added to balance everything else, make sure it's stable, but just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, and after day 14, we'll go ahead and share the results. And if you think about trying to measure itching, even to standardize that, an expert grader is going to require some level of input from the subject. So it's also why when we talk about itching, we're sharing both the expert data and the subject's self-perceived data. It's very important. There's just no other way to gauge it. So you'll see that even between the chart on the left, which is the expert grading assessment, and then the chart in the middle, which takes in the general feedback from the subjects, you'll see that by day 14, they do generally have a reduction in itching by the second week.
So I also like that the data is they do present data as percentage with reduction. So by day 14, from the investigator side, 76.5% of the people showed that improvement. Itchiness, like a lot of things, skincare, the rate of response is very important. So the majority of subjects responding to treatment does seem promising.
So I do have one gripe with this. Okay. My gripe is I would have really wanted a placebo group, because I find that with gels, especially a gel that contains dimethicone, any sort of occlusive, should in some way help a scenario like this. And I would just
100%.
like a little more context and know the relevant how much is that improvement in comparison. So this is where I'm like, I have like a gripe, if only I knew this, because it's really hard to know where we stand, right?
And I think, honestly, this sums up pretty much, generally speaking, how we feel about all the hypochlorous acid papers. It's like, promising, but there seems to be glaring questions still left. And I agree with Victoria. I'm a mosquito magnet, and I'm constantly itching during summer. And for me, a lot of times I'll put something, if I don't have an anti-itch cream on me, I'll put just lotion or like Mr. Reliable or Vaseline, whatever I have on hand on my mosquito bite. Does it really help? But I tell myself the placebo effect is alive and well, and you're not itchy anymore. And just like kind of let the soothing slash just the moisturizing, the niceness of it kind of skew my perception, and that helps.
I was gonna say forced placebo effect is a very 4D chess psychoanalysis.
It's definitely a next level desperation move.
Yeah.
This will work. I promise myself this will work.
I want the placebo effect. Okay, so to sum up itch, and we'll also kind of touch on soothing, hypochlorous acid as a soother. I want to read a quote that was made back in 2013, but I actually find is still quite relevant now. So this comes from someone trying to also write a review paper on, hypochlorous acid's potential for treating pruritus itch. This researcher writes, despite these promising results, it is not known definitively whether hypochlorous acid decreases or promotes pruritus, because so little research has been published on this topic to date. Moreover, if hypochlorous acid is antipruritic, its exact mechanism of action has yet to be elucidated. That's the summary. Like the data is messy. It is dirty. It's all like, kind of sporadic in a way. And the other challenge here is that's the state of hypochlorous acid as a soother. Also because inflammation itself is very complicated.
Yeah.
There's a lot of aspects that can basically lend to anti-inflammatory properties. I say this because hypochlorous acid as an antimicrobial can actually help in terms of soothing properties. So let's talk about it as an antimicrobial.
And the antimicrobial aspect is honestly more true to its origin story, right? Like it was a disinfectant to begin with, so it makes sense that, as a topical disinfectant, if you will, its antimicrobial activity should lend itself to, other adjacent benefits. There's definitely some more data here that's interesting. It's actually been looked at for a couple different strains of bacteria that's commonly found on skin. For example, it is active. For example, its activity against staph is probably why it's linked with benefits with eczema and otherwise. But again, specific studies on patients with eczema, psoriasis, is like small or like not to be found. Because sometimes, like Victoria mentioned in the earlier part of the segment, we'll see a review study saying, oh, like there is this study that look at patients with these conditions. It's great. And when we go to find the papers, it is 404 not found. But we will look at more closely at one paper that came up on acne. And this is the antimicrobial benefit train eventually always lead to acne. And this paper gets cited to death with, and this paper comes up time and time again when we talk about hypochlorous acid. Let's dive right in. I feel like I'm sounding more and more negative as time goes on. But
no, I think the general sense is, please, more clinicals, please. We need more clarity on this. But I'm also relieved that we can actually share this clinical because it is worth sharing. So to start, this clinical is going to be testing a hypochlorous acid solution of 140 ppm. And they are going to be testing against a comparative product that uses BPO.
My one little acne topical?
My one little gripe. There's no percentage of BPO to be found. So I'm like,
Victoria, we're in this industry of don't ask too many questions and too much of your clinicals.
I'm asking from the moon. I know. But anyway, so no percentage of BPO, which fine. And they also will test against a placebo. This study is going to be 12 weeks long. They're going to be evaluated at the 4, 8, and 12 week. The other little tiny gripe is they don't say how many times they used it a day, but we're just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, I will say this is kind of an interesting use case. In all the previous studies we shared, it's usually a shorter duration or like an aggressive use 3 times a day, and we'll look at you in 10 days or like 21 days. So this is definitely the longest study we were able to find. And I will say to their benefit, there's it's reasonably sizable. The group using hypochlorous acid has 39 people. The benzoyl peroxide, the mysterious concentration of BPO group has 24 people. And they even included a placebo group with just 22 people. So there are some good things, but I think use level is like just frustrating. Again, one of those things that's like, I wish you just tell us how much of this they use, but okay. And we'll put the results on the screen. What they did was basically they started out with patients with study subjects with roughly 30 some odd acne lesion counts, and they just did a pretty straightforward lesion count from base week 4, week 8, and week 12. The dark bar, if you're looking at it on I know. I gotta say, the bars are like different shades of gray and they're not very significantly different. So poor YouTube viewers, if you're watching this, you probably want to pause and try to dissect which one is which, because my God, I really had to stare at this for a while. Yes. So the first bar, the darkest bar, is the BPO. Oh, no. Whoa, that's wrong. Whoa, that is not right. I lied. Okay. The first bar, the darkest gray, is the SOS spray, or that is the hypochlorous acid spray. And then the second bar, the bar in the middle, is your BPO group. And then the last group, the middle of the ground gray, is your placebo. And both the BPO group and the hypochlorous spray was statistically significant from the placebo by week 8 and week 12. In terms of the raw data, I don't really know. Okay, Victoria, I have to ask you. We've done acne actives before with cell acid. We've done BPO. We've even done like things like tea tree oil. In terms of lesion count decrease, the SOS group went from 34 down to about 12 at the end of 12 weeks, and 12 weeks is not that short for acne decrease. And then BPO went from 35 to 16, whereas the placebo is 33 to 29, so roughly around the same. Would you say this data is wow?
So again,
Are you whelmed?
My gripe with not knowing the concentration of BPO. I want to believe that they're actually using a lower concentration of BPO here.
Yeah.
I think historical data. It's really unfair to like compare different studies. It's just not how that works. But it's just based on the cumulative efficacy. It just seems like they're probably using a lower dose here, I'm guessing. And yes, I would say that their hypochlorous acid spray, in terms of benefit, all I can say is that it's helpful. The degree of like efficacy is just, I think that's where there's hesitation to be like, oh, this should be a main acne compound. Like there is no evidence of that yet. I'm really glad you also asked this because they talk about it a lot in comparison to placebo. So I do want to call out that they mentioned that the hypochlorous acid group showed a greater reduction in inflammatory lesion counts than the placebo group in all follow-up visits and was comparable with the results of BPO. So I think that needs to be made clear is that in terms of the comparative benzoyl peroxide, the efficacy is generally the same. You actually see that for the BPO group, it seems to be more effective quicker than the hypochlorous acid. But again, this set of data, although much nicer than a lot of the data we shared, still has some plot holes. So we would say this is like, but is probably one of the best pieces for hypochlorous acid.
Yeah, we'll also put some of the before after pictures from the study up on the screen. And you can see for yourself. I even though it's not a controlled photography that I typically prefer for before and afters, I do appreciate that it's a very realistic expectation of what level of efficacy you can expect. You can tell that generally speaking, lesion count is less, but it's not fully cleared up, which I think it makes sense because you would think the main mode of action is antimicrobial, which has always been part of the acne journey, but it is still just one aspect of the acne journey. So yeah, I think out of all the papers we shared, this one is the one that I think, even though we have questions, it still show hypochlorous acid, I think, in the most positive or most promising light for skincare.
Totally. And I think this before and after is kind of a nice, I would say, general theory for us is that because it is an effective antimicrobial, it is also much more mild in comparison to using a BPO or a salicylic acid. There's a lot of general data where they'll look at, consumer experience or if they had any adverse reactions, and it's actually very low for hypochlorous acid. And so you can see general healing is improved. So I think this is kind of a nice summary of why we say, is it an anti-inflammatory? More data needed, but it clearly helps in the overall healing, and because of its efficacy, it helps with the overall healing. So you can see how those concepts kind of all mesh together in a result. But yeah, and that's the data.
You know what? There's at least data exists. Right? That is what I'm gonna say about that.
Thank God. So just to summarize all of this messy data that we sum up. So in terms of scar care, maybe would like more data, would like a lot more data. In terms of itching, also maybe, but in terms of an antimicrobial, much, much stronger. So ultimately, our takeaway is that it can be a helpful treatment. It's probably not going to be the ultimate miracle worker that the marketing is really making you believe, but it does something which, thank God, in general skincare, there is some meat on the bone, basically. But with that, we should take a quick break and we'll talk about what that means for actual products.
All right, it's the Animal Fun Fact Corner. And today, it's my turn. And
Give it to me.
I'm starting to see a couple themes emerge. And today we are in a category of weird animal competitions that humans put together. And I'm am, of course, talking about ostrich racing.
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me.
You know, it's actually kind of mysterious. Unlike the snail racing, which has a cute little dedicated page, it has history, it has records, ostrich racing is a little mysterious. This first came on my radar because I saw basically a chariot version of it circulating on YouTube. Where
So like
it's
gladiator style.
Yes, gladiator, but with ostriches. But looks just as dangerous as gladiator style racing. And I was like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've seen. But I cannot find a page on it. It doesn't seem like the chariot style racing is super popular anymore. So I was like, okay, so maybe I'll look up the history. And when I look up more on ostrich racing, I realized there is live human on ostrich versions of this as well.
Wow.
And I would like
I'm just gonna say, I don't know if you've ever been on those like safari zoos where you drive your car through those parks. If you've ever had an ostrich come through the window to feed, is like terrifying. Like
you don't mess with them. You do not mess with them.
No.
Yeah. I have 3 YouTube videos on this script. I would like Victoria to click on the 3rd clip and watch it right now. It's not very long.
Oh boy, here we go. Ad. I gotta get through a Nike ad. Hang on.
Sorry.
Oh my. Oh my God, that's so... How are they sitting on these things? That's amazing. The Derby riders look like they're holding on for dear life. Oh yeah. And they don't make it. Oh, okay, none of them make it.
So we will share the link below. It is worth a watch. First of all, the race is super short. It's like 10 seconds max. And I realized that is the human limit of staying on top of an ostrich.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the race, all the jockeys are just like falling off and like running for dear life. And the second reason why I wanted Victoria to watch it is the winning ostrich was named Kim Kardashian, not even named Kim K. The jockey or the owner literally named the ostrich Kim Kardashian.
I'm
Oh,
scrolling to Kim K so I can see what qualifies her as Kim K. I mean, she got a bodacious seat for the jockey to sit on, I guess. Also, Gloria, I think you would really like this. The first comment says, I remember when I was a kid playing Final Fantasy VII and raising chocobos. They are living my dream.
It's true,
it's chocobo racing in real life.
Chocobos are a lot cuter than that.
Yeah,
That was horrifying.
Yeah.
Wow. Poor man's chocobo race.
So is this is it an actual like derby where they go to different tracks, or is this just like a kind of like a fun event that happens like?
So I think nowadays, I don't know what happened to recent years. Before it feels like it's an annual thing, but now it feels more sporadic. And I will say, when I was looking up where these events are still happening, expecting some random link to link me to somewhere obscure, like some small town in the UK or somewhere in Australia. But no, it is right here in the United States of America. If you're curious, there are 2 places where you can potentially go to one of these really bizarre exotic animal races. One is Canterbury Park in Minnesota, and I don't know where that is. And then the other place is Virginia City, Nevada, which is about an hour south of Reno. So, if your family goes to Tahoe and you're like, Tahoe, been there, done that, you might consider going to Virginia City instead. And I just want to point out that if you go to the Canterbury Park one, it's not just ostrich racing. You can also, there's a camel group, and then there's also a zebra group, which one of the things that like I randomly learned is zebras cannot be domesticated because they don't have a herd mentality. They travel in groups, but they're not real. It's every zebra out for themselves. They're not really pack animals. So those jockeys are really fighting for their lives. They are not. Those are mean wild beasts. They are not meant to be ridden. So, yeah, apparently it's a American tradition.
America. There's a part of me that's just like just fascinated by how this happened, but also there's a part of me that's just like, why would you do this?
Yes. And last but not least, while we are talking about ostriches and in the spirit of hypochlorous acid, I will say, while I was researching the ostrich derby, something else came up, which is a random Reddit thread that's like, today I learned ostrich mating in captivity is actually really difficult because they tend to fall in love, the males tend to fall in love with their human handlers and end up not finding female ostriches attractive. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. I would love to read the study. And I went down the rabbit hole, and every link I think it's listed in Gizmodo, some other websites, a couple times on Reddit. But when I keep trying to find the actual paper that talked about it, it's 404 not found. The link is dead. The paper doesn't exist. The expert page is dead. So I'm like, oh, this is very on theme.
I was wondering how you were going to bring these two concepts together, and ostriches falling in love with their human, keeper is not on the bingo card. Not even remote. It's just not even within the stratosphere of that realm. But wow. Okay, so could be a myth, could be real. Who knows?
Yay, ostriches and ostrich racing.
Yay, that was really great. Awesome.
All right, let's wrap this up.
All right, so let's wrap this up. And we're going to wrap this up by telling you exactly what you should know and keep in mind when you use hypochlorous acid. So the first things first is let's address stability.
Mm-hmm.
The good thing, I think, is that there is a lot of hypochlorous manufacturers are working on improving stability. So it's not like, the industry is just using this very basic formula and just pumping it in bottles and it be what it be. But you can tell that, it's very essentially brand-based, company-based.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have some general guidelines. While we can't, sniff out every hypochlorous acid product, and do the HPLC testing, we can tell you there are some things to keep in mind. The first thing being definitely store it under vampire conditions. Like a lot of the general sensitive actives, this is definitely deserves that same treatment.
This is one that may deserve a slot in a skincare fridge if you have one of them.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. The other thing with that is don't freeze it. It is freezer sensitive, so just refrigerating is fine. No need to go overboard there. In terms of the second thing is we would actually recommend, in just seeing how it's generally pretty reactive, is when you spray hypochlorous acid, spray it on the site. Don't use any sort of medium to apply. Just like as a disinfectant, when you use it as a cleaner, you spray it on the area and you let it sit. Let's just follow those same principles. Let's have a more conservative method of application.
And also, just remember from the beginning of the episode, contact time does matter. So like I mentioned, let it sit for a little bit, chill out, sing a song, and then apply other products. And like everything else, stability-wise, we are a little sus of how stable it might be when it's elevated temperature. So if you're buying it from, say, Amazon over summer, and it's sitting on your front porch for like 6 hours before you get to it, we feel a little iffy about it. And kind of in that same token this is definitely not something you necessarily want to stock up on when there's a sale. Just buy it and use it and keep it and basically use as fresh of a batch as possible.
Yeah, and on that same note, we mentioned it just a little bit in the beginning, is like don't try buying in bulk and aliquoting to other bottles. Remember, oxygen is very much a factor in overall longevity. So, at this point, our recommendation is going to be buy what you need and plan to use it immediately. Buy it because you need it, not buy it because you're going to stock up for later, essentially.
Yeah. All right. Then the next big question, of course, we have to address is, well, should I use it? Does it work? We'll say, in a nutshell, yes, it's a good antimicrobial, but in that capacity, it probably doesn't do as many things as some of these claims can kind of tout. So ultimately, if you're acne prone, it might be worth a try, especially to supplement your routine. Antimicrobial is very much one of the cornerstones of an acne routine. In terms of soothing and everything else, we're more on the fence. But let's say you are struggling with general itchiness, eczema, and whatnot, and want to again use this to supplement and try the antimicrobial aspect, it can be worth a try. The one thing we have a question for, the thing that we're definitely most on the fence about is general inflammation, redness, and also long-term routine use.
Remember that a lot of the data we shared, the acne study is the only one that actually tested it for 12 weeks, while a lot of these were much shorter on the 2-week scale. They're not really planning to use this long term. And it makes sense because essentially if your skin is not dealing with a condition, you don't necessarily need an antimicrobial. So for us, our general stance would be like, there's no need to carve out a permanent space. This is definitely one of those things that's like, you're really problem solving in the moment.
Mhm.
So until we see more data otherwise. But yeah, it's just, the long-term understanding of it is not quite there yet.
Yeah, last but not least, and this is another one of those more food for thought question, is you might be wondering, wait, hold on, let's dial back. You mentioned that's a pro-oxidant, so does that mean it will be pro-aging and ultimately bad for skin?
Yeah. And, the lame answer is we don't know. Theoretically, as a pro-oxidant, yes, it should be an ager, but until we test it in application on skin long term, right? It's really hard to say. I think our general stance right now is that concentration and frequency will always dictate outcome. And we have a general understanding of the concentration used in skincare, and it's on the lower side. And also pairing that with its stability and reactivity, we would say that if you're using it for short-term use, the general possible damage is probably pretty minimal. And in that sense, the pros of using hypochlorous acid will probably significantly outweigh the theoretical cons. This is our theory. There's no data. And this is why, again, why more data is always needed. So with that, in terms of what is coming up next, we are testing 3 specific hypochlorous acid products as we speak. I'm going to just put it out there. It's going to be quite different because generally, as you can see, the formulation is both proprietary and quite simplistic. But we're going to be sharing some of our takeaways there in the next episode. But we do hope this is helpful to you guys in actually painting a realistic picture of hypochlorous acid for skin. As you can tell, there's quite a lot of mysteries, but with all of the hype, there's more and more products coming out, which hopefully means there's more and more data coming out. So with that, we will see you guys next time.